Tzaraim Tovim. I hope everyone is cool in this part of the world where the outside temperatures are going up, up, up. In the coming weeks, I will be using and expanding upon reflections from previous years. Everything that I present, I do put together, and when I quote other teachers, other people, other scholars, I always indicate that. So just so you know, I'm not getting this from any pre-planned book of Divrei Torah or whatever. It's thinking that I'm doing, and when I'm bringing something back in from years ago, from a more limited audience, say 30 people in our living room at a partnership minion, for example, and I know that I'm catching as many as 300 weekly on this Parsha Shir, which I thank you for, and please let me know that you're listening and that you're enjoying these. It's hard to keep track of an audience this way, or of a learning community this way. I've always asked, if you have comments, please write them in. Unfortunately, the comments I have to access differently, so I can't always respond in kind. But at any rate, this week I will be sharing and expanding upon some reflections from 2016. So I just want to say that up front. Words, intentions, and missteps. Today more than ever, and simultaneously repeating the same misstep of so many generations before us, to what degree do we check in with ourselves before we speak out? Both my husband Ken and I have been reading books and listening to discussions that assure and simultaneously horrify us with their frame of reference. Namely, that it's not worse today than in so many generations before us, but rather a repetition of the same horrors, just with more in front of our faces accessibility. We can no longer look away or ignore the lack of understanding, empathy, intentionality, and so much else that is missing. It is front and center 24/7, whether we check our emails, we turn on the TV news, whatever it is. 8 years ago, in 2016, I shared the following in my Parsha Shir, and it bears repeating at this moment, as I said, for this wider group of people. I reported as follows at that time. During the Shabbat of June 3rd through June the 4th of 2016, Rabbis Aviad Bodner and Gabriel Bellino, both amazing rabbinical figures, welcomed a community group for a Shabbaton in their respective shuls in New York. This group was Eshel, the Orthodox Consortium for LGBTQ Jews. As a result, a group of about 6 Orthodox rabbis shouted loudly and vehemently that Rabbis Bodner and Bellino should be put in chayrim and should not be considered rabbis for accepting the LGBT community members and validating them. Rabbis Bodner and Bellino stood their ground and took the heat. The Shabbaton, I was told, was an amazing success, and I also want to report that they are both doing amazing work. I actually saw Rabbi Bellino at the Eshel Gala a few weeks ago, and I give both of them and the many other rabbis that I work with throughout the U.S. and Canada and in other places as well, Yesher Koach, Kol HaKavod, thank you for observing the fundamental Jewish values that tell us to care about, accept, and welcome all into our shuls. At that time, I also wrote, a few weeks before that, Ken and I were at a wonderful gathering of about 300 Jews from all parts of the continuum of Jewish observance as part of the Center City Kehila's Tikkun Leil Shavuot. This, too, is still happening 8 years later, and we went to it. It was amazing. We stayed up all night. Several of our friends who were staying up all night 8 years ago are not doing it anymore. We're trying to hold the fort down there. They stayed up all night to learn, share, and think seriously and intentionally about what it means to be who we are in a real and personal way. In the early morning hours, news began to sift to all of us. Shavuot 2016, about a horrible tragedy in Orlando. We were stopped in our tracks. Within the joy and the uplifting nature of the celebration in which we were in the midst, we found out about this horrible tragedy in a gay bar. Rabbi Shmuel Herzfeld, another Orthodox rabbi, welcome to my world, folks, in Washington, D.C. area, who's still also doing important teaching and bringing groups together, responded as follows to the tragedy that occurred in 2016. When our synagogue heard about the horrific tragedy that took place at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, it was at the same time that we were observing Shavuot, celebrating God's giving of the Torah. As Orthodox Jews, we don't travel or use the internet on Shabbat or on holidays, such as Shavuot. But on Sunday night, as we heard the news, I announced from the pulpit that as soon as the holiday ended at 9:17 on Monday, we would travel from our synagogue in Northwest Washington, to a gay bar as an act of solidarity. We just wanted to share the message that we were all in tremendous pain and that our lives were not going on as normal. Even though this holiday is a joyous occasion, I felt tears in my eyes as I recited our sacred prayers once we knew what had happened. I had not been to a bar in more than 20 years, and I had never been to a gay bar. Someone in the congregation told me about a bar called the Fireplace, so I announced that that would be our destination. Afterwards, I found that it was predominantly frequented by gay African Americans. Approximately a dozen of us wearing our kippot went down as soon as the holiday ended. Some of the members of our group are gay, but most are not. We did not know what to expect. As we gathered outside, we saw one large drunk man talking loudly and wildly. I wondered if we were in the right place. Then my mother, who was with me, went up to a man who was standing on the side of the building. She told him why we were there. He broke down in tears and told us that his cousin was killed in the Pulse massacre. He embraced us and invited us into the fireplace. Our words and our actions cannot be separated. We must take full responsibility for both. We are going to look at two places of contention and the harm that words can bring in our Parsha. We will begin with Parak Yod Aleph 11. Vayihi ha'am kamit onanim rab oznei Hashem. The people were looking to complain, and it was evil in the ears of God. God heard, God's anger flared, and a fire from God came and burnt them. Looking to complain. They were seeking something to be angry about. The people cried out to Moshe. Moshe prayed to God, and the fire died down. The fire abated. But as soon as the fire abated, we understand that the problem with the complainers did not. Did the people realize the true harm and dire consequences that could result from their words? How much thought went into this shouting out? I want to point out that the hitpa'el form is used here in the verb. They were looking to complain, which means that there was thought given to the rebellion, if you will. After this, we get details about the foods that they had in Mitzrayim and how they want their old lives back. How is God hearing this? Are they remembering everything about their former life? Or is this a matter of selective memory and romanticizing about the good old days? After this, in chapter 12, Parak Yud Bet, we find the second instance we're going to briefly examine. V'tadaber Miriam v'Aaron b'Moshe BeHa'alotecha isha kushit asher lakach ki isha kushit lakach. Miriam and Aharon spoke against Moses regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. We're not clear on exactly what is the complaint. What is the intention that Miriam has here when she enlists Aharon's help in speaking out against Moshe, which is grammatically the way we normally read this? What is the consequence of the public dressing down of her brother? Rashi tells us that dibur, dalid bet resh, always connotes harsh talk. In other words, this was not a conversation what do you think about Moshe's wife? This was something much more insidious. Because she speaks first, the Torah indicates her name first. Vatadaber Miriam, va'aharon. And what's interesting about this is Aharon, there's no verb for Aharon, but Vatadaber is, and she spoke. So Aharon is seen as going along with this. Aharon often finds himself in this position. Think of the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf, and other instances. So Miriam has this knowledge. One direction that we can go in is that Miriam would have more inside information about Moshe's wife because women talk. There wasn't co-ed socialization at that time, the way that we take it for granted today. So according to Rashi, one of the possibilities that's indicated in the Tanchuma is that Moshe, because of his office, if you will, because of his job, because of his work, right? Not attending to the family, was ignoring his wife. And his wife came to Miriam, and then Miriam shared this with Aharon. So this becomes something that perhaps Moshe was doing. Now, the fact that it's repeated twice, Ha'isha Kushit, the Cushite woman, other commentaries will claim that the complaint is that Moshe's wife was a Midianite, not a Cushite. But why does Cushite appear and why is it repeated? Because Cushite means dark-skinned. And dark-skinned at this time meant beauty. So that she was a beautiful wife, which amplifies the notion, why would Moshe ignore his wife? And why would he ignore such a beautiful woman? They said, now we're going to introduce another idea. Harak ach b'Moshe diber Hashem, halo gam banu diber v'yishma Hashem. Does God only speak to Moshe? Doesn't God speak to us too? And God heard, and God was upset. Now, I love this little section here. Any parent will appreciate this. V'ha'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol adam asher al pnei adama. Moshe is the most humble of all the people on the earth. And then here comes one of my favorite lines in the entire Torah. Vayomer Hashem pitom el Moshe ve'el Aaron ve'el Miriam tzeu shloshtechem el omed v'yitzu shloshtechem. God suddenly says to Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, go, all of you, to the tent of meeting right now. In other words, mom is in the kitchen, the kids are fighting. All of you kids get down here in the kitchen right now. I need to talk with you. That's what's going on. God comes down in a pillar of cloud. He calls out to Aharon and Miriam. They go out. And he isolates them from Moshe at this point. Why? So Rashi and the Midrash tell us because God is going to recount Moshe's good qualities in front of Aharon and Miriam to dispel any notion that he would neglect a wife or engage in any behavior that would not seem appropriate. And God does not want to do this in front of Moshe because, I think about it, he's already called everybody into the kitchen, so to speak, or the tent of meeting. You don't want to make the other kids feel worse by extolling this one. So it's a quiet thing. And what's interesting is God's calling Aharon and Miriam to speak only to them is in counter distinction to Miriam, who shouts out. So what are we looking at here? God began all of creation with words. We know that. The world is created by 10 dibrot, aseret dibrot, the 10 commandments, the 10 pieces of creation, all of that. We see that theme a lot. Unfortunately, we as human beings who have the capacity to use words destroy too much with them. From words we go to deeds, and there's a question in halachic discourse about whether or not the words themselves are deeds. Let us think about this together. We live in a democracy in which speech is protected. However, we know all too well that evil intentions or desires for destruction that are articulated do not end with the words. As one Israeli commentator and scholar, Yossi Melman, has pointed out, there's a clear distinction between protecting freedom of speech and allowing incitement for purposes of destruction. What were the intentions of the Bnei Israel when they were looking to complain? What was Miriam's purpose when she called out Moshe? Many different thoughts have clearly been put forth. When we look at our Haftarah, remembering that this year we are connecting the Haftarah to our Torah readings, we see in Zechariah chapter 2, "Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I will come and dwell in your midst, says God. V'yinvalu goyim rabim el Hashem b'yom hahu, v'hayu li la'am, v'shachanti b'tochech, v'yadat ki Hashem tzva'ot shalachani elach." Many nations are going to come and join us on that day. But you are my people. I will dwell in your midst, and all will know that God dwells in your midst. All flesh comes from God, and God will rule all flesh. And then God says to Satan, to Satan, "The Lord will rebuke you, Satan. You will not win." We know very well the phrase from Mishlei, "B'bri pi ish tishpa b'no tevu'at tzvatav yashbiu, mavet v'chayim b'yad lashon v'ohaveha yochal priya." With the fruit of one's mouth, a person's stomach becomes sated. In other words, you eat, you're satisfied, you're fine. But here, we're also talking about what happens when your creature needs are met. Death and life, mavet v'chayim b'yad lashon, are at the hand of the tongue. I've always been impacted by the fact that the verse is mavet v'chayim and not chayim u'mavet. Why do we say death and life are at the hand of the tongue and not the other way around? Think back when they were looking to complain. Think back to Miriam. And of course, we know she will be punished with leprosy. The idea being that public scales on one's skin is reflective of the public disaster that her speech brought on. And in this verse, we learn we must think before we speak. Speech matters. Words matter. I always say, any one of us who was bullied during our school years or whatever, at any time, we remember those things. They hurt us. We're impacted by them. They are formative in terms of our personality. And hopefully we treat people better because we don't want to hurt other people. We learn from that. Specifically, I am so pained these days by the breakdown of communications and understanding due to people's inability to even speak with each other. How often do people use speech in the way of the Bnei Israel when we read within our Parsha, Vayihi ha'am kamit onenim rab oznei Hashem. They were looking to say something negative, to complain, and it was evil in the ears of God. God heard, God's anger flared. When do we lack care in how we speak, when we speak, and how we use the audience in front of us, as Miriam did not do? But Daber Miriam v'Aaron, and Miriam spoke, and Aaron joined her against Moshe about the woman he married. As the Chafetz Chaim teaches, when we speak, we must ask ourselves several questions. 1, what am I saying? 2, what is my intention for saying it? 3, who has to hear it? And 4, am I tale-bearing? Do I have nefarious purposes for speaking? Or am I trying to achieve a noble goal? And how will people hear it? In communications theory, we learn it's not what I say, it's what the person I'm speaking to hears. We must take care with our words. especially in these volatile times. I gave a share recently where we were talking about how families that have come together for Sadarim for years and years and decades could not come together this year because people are speaking so harshly and maintaining their political, cultural, whatever position and not listening to anyone else anymore. The Baal Shem Tov teaches, when a person speaks good words, the speech, which is the life force of the person and the life force from God, rises up and arouses the most important and supernal words. God formed the human being, the earthling, out of the dust of the earth and breathed into their nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. We are taught at this point the human being is given words. The Targum Onkelos translates this as not man or the human being, the earthling, became a living soul, but the human being became a speaking spirit. A person's speech is an expression of the very soul that God breathes into that person. When the person speaks evil words, he comes close to losing his life force altogether. Then, additional life force radiates upon him from above. However, when he does speak evil words, his vitality leaves him and does not rise up. He comes close to losing everything. This is what people say about a talebearer, a gossiper, according to the Tzivot Harash. We find many instances in which the sages of the Gemara speak against evil speech. In Hebrew, lashon hara, rechilut, slander, tale-bearing. You're not even supposed to carry tales if it's something true that somebody told you in confidence. How then did they themselves say most people commit theft and everyone speaks the dust, avak, lashon hara, even the possibility of how you're saying what you're saying. Again, communications theory, not what I'm saying, how are you hearing? And am I conscious of how it's being heard? Was Miriam conscious of how her words were going to affect Aharon? Were the complainers conscious of the impact of their complaints on everybody? Were the scouts who came back from Eretz Canaan, as we read before, or as we will read next week, just kidding. Just goes to show you I prepare ahead of time, so I kind of forget what comes before and after. Will they think hardly, or will they think intentionally about how their words are heard by others? The dust of lashon hara, avak lashon hara, means those subtle innuendos that most people make, even those careful not to speak overt lashon hara. Yet by making this statement, the sages themselves seem to be saying lashon hara about the Jewish people. In other words, if the sages are saying everybody speaks the dust of lashon hara, that's lashon hara. Okay, I can see some of you laughing who are listening to this. So what would be their purpose in doing so? Let us all commit ourselves to thinking before we speak, and to realize how important it is to speak with each other, how important it is to hear opinions, hear ideas that are different than ours. I know I'm repeating that a lot this year, and I apologize. But guys, if we can't speak with each other, then forget it. We've lost everything. As a wonderful colleague, Nora Aswali of mine, a Saudi Shiite Muslim woman, face veiled, just lovely, religious individual, what a soul, says, don't attack me, don't assume what I believe, ask me questions. And I say the same thing in my work in the multi-faith world. We must realize that it is more important than ever that we work to build those bridges that connect us, not fences that divide us further in our already way too fractured world. Let us light the way. I didn't say anything about that, but the Parsha actually begins with the lighting of the menorahs. Let us light the way as our Parsha begins with light, with our words and deeds. Shabbat Shalom. Be well all. Next week, I believe, the week of July 4th, Independence Day, which is on Thursday, I will be recording earlier. So I'm not, is it next week or the week after? I forget. But whatever that week is, it will be recorded earlier. I wish you all well. And again, stay cool, stay hydrated. Lehitraat.